at this idea of we prioritized a task in this set of submissions. It was queen larva injects. And then we're looking at what happens when you redo a priority list. And I can't emphasize enough how essential it is to actually have a priority list to work on. Where you're saying, like, in these games, I'm working on my larva injects. In these next set of games, I'm working on my creep spread. And that's all you actually do. Because the learning process will feel vastly different from you just playing a lot and playing a lot and playing a lot, and you just kind of slowly moving forward like a glacier in terms of skill. You want to have focused, fast, zippy things. And in part 1, we saw Zolorian hit the larva injects so incredibly well, he even looked better than Liquid Red. However, we saw him getting supply blocked really quickly and having way more larvae than he actually seemed to know what to do with. This is very common. Your games will feel a lot faster. And we just looked at kind of why it was happening, how it felt, and emphasized that that's okay. Emphasize that that's okay. And I hinted at something a little bit. I didn't go into too much detail because that's for parts 2 and 3. And that's the following. When we start improving a lot in terms of our mechanics, or whenever we're fixing some goal, once we have fixed the problem, we can begin to ask questions we were not allowed to ask before. Something like, if I'm totally out of shape, and then I spend a year running and getting in shape, then I can ask myself the question, where's a fun marathon to go on? Where's a fun hike to go on? I don't do that when I've just been sitting in my room eating Doritos for 3 months, right? Like, I would actually drop dead. In other words, the possibilities we have available to us as a strategist are greatly improved when we start solving these problems. And very exciting news, as I was drinking out of this mug, I realized that it actually just has my roommate on it. I don't know why, but it's just very weird to be drinking with Asher's face, like, right there. And I did pay him rent this month, so that's actually fine. Let's hop into this game where we have Magnus Wolf in the right position. And what I want to just briefly note is that, again, Magnus Wolf is going to be spot on, dead on, absolutely amazing. I love this. Magnus Wolf is going to be great with those larva injects. He's going to be spot on. Magnus Wolf is an example of someone who has fixed the issue of missing larva injects. But we're still going to see some of the similar issues that we saw Zolorian have. Some of those similar issues would include an inability to do a lot of aggression, looking a little more passive because so much time is spent here in the hatch, here at this hatch, here at the goal that he'll eventually be taking. Solo being awesome and wishing luck in very specific kinds of fashions. But okay, so Magnus Wolf is a guy who is our larva injector. He's spotted his opponent, and we see that it looks like a drone went out to scout, and it was pulled back. And that's pretty awesome. By the way, I just hate when that happens, when you misarrange your one hatchery. But Magnus Wolf will be continuing to have kind of a normal build, and this is something that actually comes after having good macro. 16 hatch, 16 pool, 15 extractor does not mean anything unless you're hitting all your drone timings properly. Builds are pretty meaningless without good mechanics. So that's why I always say have kind of a vague idea of what you have going on. Or have a vague idea of what your overall strategy is, and then work on your macro, and then try to flesh out a build. The build is the last step. We see Solo doing a nice little wall off here with some barracks. And we're going to come back and look at Magnus Wolf's play. And now what we're going to do is we're going to start identifying strategic problems. Not these basic problems like what we saw Zolorian have, where it was like, wow, look at that. A lot of your hatches have absolutely nothing producing out of them. But you are injecting your larva on time. We're going to ask questions like, when should he be transitioning? When should he be getting a layer? When should he be getting these extra gases? What should he be doing with these Zerglings? And we see him poking a little bit with them and pulling them back. Let's actually go ahead and go to the Magnus Wolf cam. Solo, of course, doing a touch of gloating going on. Saying it's certainly interesting before actually macroing. That's why his money's so high. But as we see, we have some Zerglings popping down right now. And the money is still quite high. Again, this is what happens when you get this huge extra swell of drones out early from those larva injects. So, what was one of the questions that we talked about last game? Well, it's whenever I get a batch of larvae, what do I do with it? Do I make drones? Do I make zerglings? What is the best option at this point in time? And these are questions that we were not allowed to ask until we had that macro absolutely spot on with our larva injects. This is an interesting decision. If you are inexperienced, often the only question, or the only way to defend, is to just build spine crawlers. But now that you have those timings, you have those zerglings available to you. And that's why whenever anyone asks me about strategy and counters and all this other business, I just want to be like, well, if you're not building, you know, your shit right on time, that's bad, right? Like, it doesn't mean anything to say banelings are really good against Marines, because if you're getting your banelings at the 20-minute mark, it's really different from, you know, people like July who are getting their banelings at like the 9-minute mark with upgrades. So, that's one of the most important things in the whole wide frickin' world. So Magnus Wolf is now doing some timing things I like quite a bit. He's getting a baneling nest while his lair is building. These are things that I like. His larva injects are being quite spot on. Still having a couple of issues with this money. And let me just point out explicitly how your money will feel when you have little tiny problems. So let's see. Is this where... It's certainly interesting. Okay, I think this is right when he builds the zerglings. Yeah, okay, so right now we have some larvae here and some larvae here. Here's an explicit example. Okay, so let me just shut up and try again. There we go, right? So, in the Zalorian game, I was just going, oh, look at all those larvae available. He should spend that larva. That's like level 0 thinking. That's flat basic thinking, right? I should want to spend my larva. Here's a specific instance of how your decision making and your learning can be ruined by not fixing mechanics problems. So right now, Magnus Wolf has 10 larvae. As you'll note, if Magnus Wolf spent all his larvae, he would have a little under 150, and he'd have 150 gas. So he can basically build a bunch of drones and build a lair. His money starts to get a little bit high here. It's been high for quite some time. So there we see all the drones get made. All right, and that all looks good. And then what does he do? He has money left over. So he's kind of like, oh, okay, well, I made all my drones there, and let me build a baneling nest because I have some money. Let me go ahead and build a lair because I have some money. But again, the larva just popped off, and we actually don't quite have enough money to be able to spend it. This larva should be popping off shortly. There we go. We have a bunch of larvae hiding under here. So suddenly Magnus Wolf is kind of scrambling to catch up. Having 2 larvae doesn't look that bad when you have, you know, actually it was even more extreme 10 seconds ago. 2 larvae just hanging out doesn't look bad when you have like 7 eggs producing. But at any moment when your hatch is at 3 larvae, it's not producing additional larvae. So you are slowly falling behind. So we saw Magnus Wolf have a little bit of extra money and go, whatever, all right, I'm just building a hatch and a baneling nest. And it's this larva pop off where suddenly we have, what is it, 7 larvae. I have to actually wait for the larva to land on the ground. And now we have, geez, look at that, 14 larvae. And we're broke. As it turns out, getting this hatch into a layer and getting this baneling nest this early can't actually work out. You can't actually do this. So one of the prompts for the submissions were, give me a game of you having perfect and larva injects and still losing. And this is what I call a bump in a build. And it can sometimes be a little bit concealed for Zerg because everything's feeling good, and then all of a sudden you have 14 larvae sitting around, and hell, these hatches are about to pop off a ton more larvae in a second, and Magnus Wolf is sitting here with a lot more to spend. Often, as a Zerg player, you will not feel them so much. If you're Protoss, you will. I mean, if you build like 17 gateways, and then you can produce out of like 4 of them, and you have like 13 gateways just hanging out. You're going to be like, ooh, maybe I didn't need 13 gateways extra right there. For Zerg, and actually for all races, when you start to smooth things out, you'll realize that you're not quite getting as many buildings as you thought you were. Most of your money is actually being devoted to getting all your capacity spent, getting all your barracks to churn stuff out, getting all your larvae to churn stuff out. That's where most of the time is actually spent, most of the mental effort. In particular, most of your freaking money, the more important thing. So now, Magnus Wolf, it looks like, has just been adding himself on a bunch of drones. He's getting his infestation pit. That's great. And now he's building a whole bunch of Zerglings. But part of me wants to say, well, dude, you're only actually at 34 drones. Everyone knows the numbers with drones from an observer perspective. A lot of people know 75 drones is a good number to get to. On 2 bases, you can get up to 55 drones quite quickly. These sorts of numbers people are familiar with, but in a game, especially when you've been gifted with the perfect larva inject that you've been working on, everything feels like it's happening so unbelievably fast that things like this happen. Things like getting a whole bunch of Zerglings. When I actually think we probably didn't need so many. We do see there's a pretty substantial push coming out by Solo. But I want to point out how this goes. I want to point out how this goes, and we're going to think about this again, all back in terms of money. So hey, what do you know? We're surrounding, and we are going to end up demolishing this push. Frickin' crushing this push. Now, what will happen again is in terms of process in the game is you're going to think to yourself, I did something good. I killed an attack. Therefore, everything I have been doing at this point has been awesome. Your brain literally just gets flooded with endorphins. You're like, oh, I'm so smart. However, you need to know that maybe we're not actually going to have this... or excuse me, maybe something else is going on bad at home. In particular, 7 drones at your expansion when we're almost at 10 minutes. That's pretty bad. That doesn't seem very strong. We held off this push with extreme ease. Maybe we overbuilt units. Maybe you actually could have had both these geysers going and a bunch of drones and your infestation pit still done and still had exactly this many units. This is a different kind of problem in gameplay. This is you needing to fix something straight up. This is not you having more choices. Once you clean everything up, you can start to really begin to exploit when you're making drones versus not drones from your larvae. But I mean, like, not having this gas up, having these little duders left over. Still pretty good larva inject timings, but it looks like there was a little bump there. And that is actually so important to note that we're actually going to come back to the Magnus Wolf cam. We see that the push is just now pulling back. We see that the hatcheries are about to eject. And amazingly, things will mess up for you a lot after the moment of tension is gone. In the moment of tension where the battle's happening, in the moment of tension, people tend to perform pretty okay if they're really trying to. Like, ooh, I'm in the big battle. I better not mess up my larva inject because Day 9 told me not to. Weirdly, it is 30 seconds after the battle. It's that period of time when everything gets messed up. Look at this. Magnus Wolf didn't die to this attack. And he's spending all this time looking in the center of the map with his Zerglings moving around. Now I'm going to take control of the camera and notice that this queen is not injecting. This queen is not injecting. Back to the Magnus Wolf cam. And now suddenly it injects. It's a little bit afterwards when you always get a little bit thrown off kilter. And you see how high the money was? Nothing was actually being spent. And this is kind of like incidental spending that's going on by Magnus Wolf. It's, oh, I guess I have this money, so I'll go ahead and use it, I guess. Magnus Wolf taking his gold expansion. Do we want to be taking this gold expansion now? Is 10 minutes and 50 seconds the right time to do that? Should it be taking at 10? Could it be taking at 9:30? If I take something like 8 minutes and 30 seconds, can I actually afford to defend that? You are only allowed to answer that question after you have fixed whatever the hell it is you're trying to fix. Like if you're working on a creep spread and you're like, yeah, and then, huh, When do I take my expansion? Well, always make sure you're asking it in the context of whatever the hell you're trying to work on. Which is actually going to end up being the topic for next week. But of course, I'll tell you about that at the end. So everything looking pretty good for our good friend Magnus Wolf. But again, we're noticing some passivity that ends up happening. Aggression is another thing that I think people will need to work on a lot whenever they end up fixing some sort of problem strategically or some sort of defense. Like right now, Solo has a whole bunch of bunkers in middle. How exactly did Zerg let that occur? The macro is going to be decent and it's going to end up being okay, but for us now, what I want to say is if I'm in Magnus Wolf's position, when can I begin attacking? Now that I'm actually starting to land these larva ejects, when do my attacks happen? When do my expands happen? And what we're actually seeing is Magnus Wolf is continuing to transition in a way that makes quite a lot of sense. He's getting more infestors up, he's getting Zerglings and Banelings, he's expanding. This is a little bit above Zalorian, who was basically just battling to keep his head afloat, going at 100 miles an hour. We're seeing Magnus Wolf sort of acknowledge, oh man, I have money, I guess I need to expand, I guess I need to do this and that. Oh, there's a drop that happened, oh crap, that's bad news, until I end up killing it off with fungal growth. But again, we note, right in those little moments of tension, for getting a little teensy bit of Das Larva Inject. And we can see some of the awesome side effects from the problem that we fixed. Look at how much, a ridiculous amount of money Magnus Wolf has. He has so much freaking money. He could actually even easily begin to put down those upgrades. And with that influx of money, with the upgrades, again comes more decisions. So Magnus Wolf, as we speed things up, we want to actually see what the final battle and the final confrontation looks like. He's rebuilding everything back in his main. But what we also see is that this, if we actually back up just a little bit, we see that the Zerg player is ahead of Terran in food. Actually, if we open this up, he has more workers, his army supplies even, but he also has the very scary infestor numbers starting to get very, very high. He has a really good army, and he has more money. All signs point to Magnus Wolf. All signs do. And this can be a very, very fun process in your gameplay to fix a mechanical problem, and then you have more strategic choices, so you start trying to work on those. And then we bounce back and we ask ourselves, can we fix some more mechanics problems? And you work on those, and then it opens up even more strategic decisions. Like, for instance, being able to hit good fungal growths down suddenly means that you can probably defend against those drops, even if they do a lot of damage. And this is just kind of ridiculous. Huge, gigantic frickin' wall in the middle. Magnus Wolf trying to take as many expansions as he can. And this is a weird phase that I think everyone will eventually pass through. And I'm sure a lot of you Diamond, Platinum Masters who used to be Silver and Bronze know that there was a period in time where you would end up getting maxed really quickly, and you basically only attack when you were maxed, when there was nothing left to build, because that's all your brain could handle. You went from learning to macro at all, then to asking yourself questions about composition, and once you get to that phase, then you can begin asking questions about really nice timings and stuff like this. Like Magnus Wolf just kind of suddenly gets attacked here. I think he was like not quite ready, and things just kind of get boxed and sent in, and everything's kind of an ugly mess. And we throw down some fungal growth, but the organization was quite bad. Whoopsie doopsie daisies. So Magnus Wolf suddenly has to ask himself, what the hell do I work on for next game? What do I work on? We do simple little things. We can just pick one or two things for each phase of the game. For me, in the early game, I would say make sure I always hit my larva injects. For this mid-game period, around 12 minutes, I would say something like, try to do some counterattacks here at these destructible rocks. Try to be more active with my Zerglings. Try not to let stuff like this happen. Alright, that's the second thing I'm going to be working on. That's great. And then down here, when we have a final battle engagement, we can say something like, alright, you know what? Actually, let me even pull ahead a little bit more to 18 minutes. There we go. We can say something like, I always need to have my whole army hotkeyed. Look at this. He has hatches, queens, and just his infestors. Nothing else is hotkeyed. So in the future, I guess I'll just have everything clumped together a little bit more tightly. And now we have some really basic strategic stuff to work on while we still end up trying to refine our mechanics a little bit. We have a couple of strategic things to work on while we refine our mechanics a little bit. Again, you'll notice it's a little bit better than the one before. We talked a lot about all the macro problems that were cropping up, but we still got a couple of strategic nuggets out of there. And I cannot emphasize enough, when you start fixing mechanics problems by being extreme, like when you say to yourself, I will never miss a larva inject, and you go nuts with it, you go hog wild, you will feel like you are playing way faster, and it is hard to get used to that. So just do little tiny steps at a time, and as we step into this last game, we're actually going to do a whole bunch of strategic considerations throughout. So it's all going to be like, strategically, what could we have done better right here? Strategically, what could we have done better right here? So we are going to take a brief breakaroo. Don't go anywhere, you cutie pies. We'll be back with more daily action in a second. Until then, listen to musique.